Hello, and welcome to the Be Formless Flow Driven CEO and VC podcast, where we are reshaping life, leadership, business, and investing from the inside out. And today I am welcoming to the show James Bitanga. Welcome to the show, James.
Thanks, B. Thanks for having me.
No, you're welcome. And I'm grateful that you're coming on the show, given that you're in the throes of moving houses after 4 years, and that's always creates a lot of upheaval. So you're undertaking your own transformation right now, right?
I am indeed, but happy to be here regardless. Like,
Yeah.
there's never a good
Well,
time, right?
no, it's never a good time. Okay, so thank you for joining us. You're based in Singapore. I got that right. I'm pretty sure. Yep, I got that right. I know I got that right. I have to check myself every now and again because I'm speaking to so many people from all around the world. I feel like I go around the world sometimes in a day.
Really can see that on your podcast, too.
Yeah, thank you. So let's get into it. I have been looking forward to this conversation. You and I have caught up a couple of times. We've had a little bit of chemistry and catching up and sharing lots of different views on what the future looks like, the next generation of founders and leaders, very much focused in and around consciousness, sustainable future, all of that. And so I love your title. Your title is Next Culture Enabler. It's such a cool, I'll get you to share in a minute about the fact that you removed all the hierarchy from roles and titles. And so I shouldn't have even called it a title. You're the next culture enabler at Reapra, and you've got your branded t-shirt on there. So that's very cool. I love that. And it's a founder first organization based in Asia Pacific the business is focused on building financially sustainable businesses that solve long-term systemic problems. And we don't talk about the systemic problems enough. Reapra is known as future industry builders. And since joining Reapra in its early days, I think you said you've been there 4 years. You've been part of shaping a fundamentally different approach to venture, moving away from the hyper-growth and short-term capital cycles towards long-term industry building, founder development, and enduring value creation. The work that you do within Reapra sits at the intersection of venture, culture, and learning systems. So rather than focusing purely on scaling companies, you and the team focus on how organizations evolve into next generation learning environments. I think that's great, the next generation learning environments. And this is where
Yeah.
founders are developed over decades, not just funding cycles, and where businesses are designed to outlast trends. And I think I would call out where businesses are becoming more and more conscious and more soulful and got that heartbeat within them as well. You've obviously got the experience
Right.
across digital media, marketing, and technology in both Asia and North America. So you bring that global lens, and your core focus remains consistent in terms of reshaping how we think about work, entrepreneurship, and the role of conscious capital in building the future. Through Reapra, you work closely with the founders navigating uncertainty, supporting them not just in building companies, but also in developing the thinking, resilience, and long-term orientation required to shape entire industries. And the bit I really like, and I'm keen for you to share a bit more about it, is with Reapra, it's research and practice put together, interconnected as such. So I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us a bit about your journey and the philosophy of Reapra.
Sure. So, actually, that was a really nice summary. I'm not sure I could ever repeat the way you summarized it. It sounded really good. And
Thank you.
I'm actually quite humbled by it. I feel like a bit of an imposter. But that's because you can contrast that with my previous career, where I was actually a lawyer. So I was a practicing lawyer in New York back in the day. Uh, I went through the whole thing of, my parents expecting me to have
Mm.
a specific role in the family. I still am the eldest son. And I'm not sure if it was an Asian family thing, but there's this whole, my father was an entrepreneur. He expected me to take over the family business. He expected all of his kids to have a master's degree or an MBA. I think in my particular case, they wanted a lawyer in the family. So there's a whole combination of having a lawyer, a business person, and a doctor. And so they
Yeah,
put me through law
of
school
course.
after I went through business school. So the whole social family construct expectation,
Yeah, 100%.
framework. It's like I lived right through it. And,
With the
so what I
white
would
picket
say
fence
is,
as well?
with a wide picket fence. I lived in suburban California growing up, prior to that suburban Vancouver. And absolutely, it was just kind of this ideal world where the structure was set out for you.
Mm,
And so I'd say that my journey to getting to Repro was one of, I would say, it was an eye opening experience
mm,
because there was a lot of internal conflict that I had about living a life the way that was expected of me, whether it was something as direct as my family or the white picket fence society I lived in, or, and this is very American, I think Australia shares the same thing too, sitcoms, TV
yeah,
sitcoms, just like this is
yeah,
what a family should be like. You should have a house that looks like this. You should have a job that is like this. You should be able to afford to buy groceries, get a mortgage, get a car. And it's really like, as a young person growing up in this world, I'm not that young, but back in the '80s and the '90s, watching TV shows and hanging out with similar families, our identities get shaped by these societal expectations, and they were
mm,
handed down to us from our grandparents, and we thought that that's the way you got to live, and we thought that that's the way the world was going to be, until, of course, many things have changed. Technology, things get faster, things getting cheaper. Suddenly everyone could afford to travel compared to, 20, 30 years ago. Like the world getting smaller. All of
yeah,
these things just started to change. And suddenly everything that was told to us on how to live became quite jarring. A bit of an existential crisis, if not existential dread. So yeah, so my journey was quite interesting because I can literally contrast the way that I
mm,
lived up until the point that I decided this Reapra project, which is not a project anymore, was something that was so terrifying for me because it was terrifying and exciting at the same time because it was
mm,
challenging the assumptions of not just how to do business, but in how we were expected to live and learn. So I'd say that's kind of the backdrop of my journey, and at some point I had to get in touch with this deeper sense of, being a lawyer or taking over my father's family business was not really the right way
where
to
you want,
go for me.
yeah, yeah. Well, how
So I'd
did
say that
you there's a bit to unpack there, internal conflict, identity. I was gonna get to that in terms of your response to my question when you booked in for the pod. Was there one moment where you're on this career trajectory, like you say, like you were talking about I guess, the nuclear family, if you like, the nuclear way of, we're being brought up, etc. And you go to university, you get a job, you do this, you do that. It's like that ladder that you're climbing. How did Reapra come about? How did the project? Was it something that was like a sliding door moment where it came to you? Like, what was? Yeah, how did that come about?
I think it was just a bit of a cosmic convergence because the original idea was created by our founder. There's a fellow named Shuhei Morifuji, a pretty successful entrepreneur in Japan, which is rare because in Japan, corporate culture is very dominant and entrepreneurship
Yeah.
takes a back seat. So he was one of those kind of average university students who had a beautiful mind. The way that he thought about the world and his worldviews were very different from Japanese society, which I think you probably know where I'm driving at with this. Made him such an interesting and very successful entrepreneur in Japan. And he wanted to replicate this basic idea, this basic, I guess, premise. Forget the idea for a moment, but this premise that, our identities are the constant interactions of our ego in the environment. And he
Mm,
understood that a mile away, which, because he had this sort of meta view that we are sometimes being pulled towards societal or family expectations, and he didn't operate that way. He wanted to be able to apply those assumptions into building a business to see if he could help his learning. So he started figuring out complex systems. His last business was to build something to address the long term systemic problem of the aging population of Japan. But even when he was younger, he was curious about things like pachinko. Pachinko is Japanese, it's kind of like a casino, but it's a Japanese game where you can gamble a bit, but there's all these noises. It looks like a slot machine, but a lot more
yeah, okay.
advanced. And as a young child, he was like, his mind wanted to solve the complex system of pachinko. Not which machine is going to get me the most money, but he looked at the geography, he looked at the history of the industry, he looked at the types of employees that were hired, he looked at where a store was situated in the suburbs versus another corner in the city, and he wanted to understand these complex systems, and it actually translated to him understanding the system that once in a while he would actually make a lot of money, play money, like he didn't really care. He still doesn't really care about money just because he can solve that problem of a complex system. And he realized that there was a lot of depth in learning to figure out complex systems.
Mm.
And the biggest barrier to people who are not like him was exactly what you just mentioned, is that because we're all stuck in formulas of problem solving and living life that had been told to us by our teachers, by our
Going
families,
great. Yeah.
we just don't see beyond our own universes to be
Mm.
able to solve problems he did. So he wanted to replicate that, and he started Reapra.
Wow. And that's where the research and the practice comes into it, right? So he's gone and done all his research to understand, the complexity of the system, and almost like gone deep into it. This is just me getting my perspective. He's gone deep and deep into it, and then he's unpacked it, and he's almost like pulled it apart and then put it back together again to kind of really get to or putting together a new system, if you like. Still remains complex, but a system that is more sustainable, more fruitful for the next generation. Is that somewhat what the philosophy is in terms of the reshaping and the continuity of reshaping?
I think it's one of the premises of ongoing activity. Maybe it doesn't summarize the entire philosophy, but one thing that we realized in this world was the themes or the domains of research and practice are fairly bifurcated. They're very separate. You go to an organization and their research team is the research team, R&D
Yeah.
department. You talk about a career, like, oh, the researchers are the ones doing PhD. Everyone else works for a corporation or starts their own business. And we wondered, why did it have to be separate? Why
Mm.
can't everyone be sort of a generalist, as you were saying, pulling apart and putting back together, mixing this yin and yang of research and practice at the same time? So your curiosity makes you research, but you're also very active using your practice and your actions as they both the data that comes from research and practice collide. And that collision is where you get your learnings. I was wrong about that assumption. All that research helped me with this particular action. This particular action yielded that research was absolutely wrong. You just continue to collide. And this constant cycle of research and practice is an activity that we think should be inherent in someone who wants to extend and expand their learning as a generalist in this space. So that's where research and practice come from. That's
Love
the
that.
name of the company.
Yeah, no, I love it, and first principles thinking and critical thinking comes to mind as well as part of all of this. There's times when you need to apply the first principles thinking, and then there's times when you need to apply the critical thinking. Tell us a little bit about then how you guys are working with, you're building, known as the future industry builders. Tell us a little bit about that and how Repra is, you're the next culture enabler. What are you doing with the founders and the companies that you're working with?
So I think one of the premises of what we want to build. So the reason why we use future industries is so that we can actually separate ourselves from what most of the startup and the venture market revolves its conversations around, which is products and companies.
Mm, mm,
And so if we say industries as an example, there's already this connotation of magnitude, but there's also a connotation of time frame. So when we say, and it doesn't take, you can't build an industry really overnight unless you're trying to disrupt with technology, which is something that we try to stay away from intentionally, although we embrace it actually happening in the real world. So the magnitude and time frame of an industry that we're looking at matches the underlying long-term systemic problems we want our founders to solve. So if you're solving a long-term systemic problem, and you're doing it co-creating with other people over, let's say, a 20, 30, 40-year period, that we say that the outcome of you solving that problem isn't a mega product or a mega platform. It's an industry, right?
yeah.
It's an industry where players have followed you into this space to address whatever these systemic problems might be. So let's say in Japan, the aging population, which cannot
Mm,
be singularly solved by one company. It's got to be solved by multiple companies, including your competitors, including stakeholders like the government. But you're the pioneer bringing it all together. So that's why we say future industries instead of products or
Yeah, it's
companies.
it's it's fascinating, and at this point in time, it feels like every industry is almost. I could be saying this loosely, and some of the listeners might just roll their eyes at me. It does feel like, though, that the industries as we know it are up for grabs, and here you are focusing on the next gen of industries. Like, what are you seeing that's fundamentally changing right now or transforming it, if you like? Like, what are some of the, and what are some of the biggest systemic problems that you're seeing more than
Yeah.
ever?
Right. So I think to answer the first part of your question, a lot of it actually is not the creation of new industries from scratch. What we're starting to see is that when people project long-term systemic problems for 20, 30, 40 years, there's certain current industries or domains that touch on what it might look like in the future. So when we talk to founders who think about their long-term systemic problems, they never have a single answer. They say it's a bit of wellness, but it's also a bit of hospitality. It's a bit of
Yeah.
well-being, also a bit of agriculture. And that's what we mean by new industries. It's not creating something from scratch, but it can be a confluence of people looking again at complex systems where current industries, which might be slightly artificially separated, because in a true economic system, industries work off of each other, right? People are reshaping the way they look at current industries, and maybe emerging industries might come from that
Mm.
confluence as well. It may have a new title in the future. So in that sense, I would say of the current domains that are influencing that, we see a lot of wellness on this side of the world. There are quite a few who are looking at, I guess, environment and sustainability as other domains. We're looking at founders. And by the way, we're not choosing these topics. They come from the founders who go through our program, right? There's definitely aspects of agriculture and food security, the
Yes.
future of food, all these things that they just start to emerge from different places. And so we don't handpick the industries based on what we think the long-term systemic problem is. We work with founders to give us ourselves and themselves a fuzzy definition of what it is based on the current research. And we spend day after day trying to update the resolution of what that problem is over the next few years. So even the way they
Mm,
think of the problem
mm,
will change as they research and practice over time.
mm, mm. It's
So it's a bit,
fascinating, and yeah, sorry, you go.
no, that's it.
So I use the word new because, I've taught you a lot about my formless methodology, or not a lot. I've shared with you a bit about my formless methodology, and that's the learn, unlearn, relearn. And I use the word new, and what I mean by that is it's a new form of, for example, it's similar to reshaping. It's a new form of an industry as we know it. It's a new form in terms of when you talked about wellness, hospitality, etc., coming together, and for me, that is a new form in that regard. So that's why I use the word new. And so I appreciate what you're saying. It's just kind of my language that I use, because I think you and I have got quite a few similar, ideations around what the future looks like, and what that looks like in business. And, from a founder perspective, what I wanted to talk to you about was, tell us a little bit about Next Culture, in terms of you're a Next Culture enabler, and you and I have had a couple of different chats in terms of, and I brought up consciousness, and I've talked to you a little bit about soul. What are you seeing? Like, what do you believe are the big, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, what is Next Culture? What does that look like to you?
Yeah. That's a great question. And mind you, I think I have to put aside where we are right now at this inflection point of AI threatening jobs and all that stuff. So this is prior to sort of us starting to see the emergence of AI. But I think some of the things that I'm about to share with you, I think are still consistent regardless.
Mm.
There's a really one of my favorite books, which I think has been under the radar, but people who study business should actually read this. It's a book called The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. I'm not sure if you've read it, but
No,
he
I've heard of
is,
it.
I would
I've never
say,
read it.
he's great. He's this MIT guy who started studying learning organizations. And I thought it was so interesting because I thought it was a bit ahead of its time, where essentially the purpose of the organization was based on learning as an organization and for its members, which is very different from what I've seen and what we see, especially with very strong, active capital markets, kind of the American way. I can say that because I grew up in America, right? This whole boom, boom,
Yeah,
boom, grow, 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 quarterly result. All that stuff.
so true.
All of this is to say that the understanding of not just people's anecdotal reactions, but even the way education systems prep you for work, is that once you're in an organization, the ultimate relationship between you and the organization is value extraction. How much are you getting for, and how much is the employer getting out of you until such point that you've lost that sort of reciprocal, or it has become asymmetrical to the point that you might have to move on or change relationships. I know it sounds a bit simplistic because things in the workplace have changed over time, but Senghi and the learning organization studies have basically said, well, what if we shape decisions of hiring, shaped work processes or work expectations for specific roles based on one's ability to learn and contribute to the greater learning of an
Mm,
organization? And so from that perspective, when I say next culture enabler, from what I'm wanting to do, I think of my personal long-term systemic problem to be solving, I would say, changing the identities of corporations to bring about that second wave of learning organizations that, let's say, someone like Senghi had started in the beginning, but the Reapra way. And what I mean to say is, what if we do radically, although gradually over time, change the identities of corporations in terms of the way they value themselves, or the way the markets value themselves,
mm,
the way they hire, maybe from the perspective of people entering the workforce, the way that they choose companies will
mm,
be on the basis, what is my learning path? So like maybe in the future, statistics like attrition won't really matter so much because you've
mm,
intentionally created a learning path for your employees, such that it's not anymore about, have I kept you long enough to get whatever value I've gotten out of you, and now it's time for you to leave, right? You change the conversation, and maybe in the future, we're not going to have, hopefully under my watch, or at least under my influence, not having terms like employer employee anymore. I can say this loud. I hate the word human resources.
so do I.
It doesn't
God,
have,
I'm into that. I hate it as well. It's like you're a human resource. It's like I hate the word service, like account service, anything to do, anything service related. It's just like it's awful. It's just an awful transactional. It's got no heart, no soul, whatever in it. It's human and resources. I mean, no. Yeah, I agree.
and so I think that's kind of my vision for 20, 30, 40 years, which I'm working on, which I may continue to do even after I leave Reapra. Basically, it's my own North Star, so to speak. And that's just to give you an idea that when we look for people to become our potential founders, we make sure that they look for their North Star as well, connected to their identities. So that when they set up their organization, it's not about the right product, it's about having the right vision for their personal lives, including visions that they have for the future that they may continue to contribute to after they leave the company they started with us. So we make them think about longer timeframes about their life, and not just give me the returns of the company we've
Yeah.
invested in, you built with us. We want them to think beyond the organizations that they build with us. So that's probably a unique perspective that we have on
Yeah, it's a
timeframes.
great perspective though, because like I love like even the word culture, right? Like culture is such a broad, it's like a broad word if you ask me in terms of, and what you're getting to the heart of is, the complex systems, the need for an identity, the need for a value creation, a value exchange as such, not in the way that we've always known it, but how do we do it now, and what does that look like from a long term perspective? I think we're at the moment the word that keeps ringing true for me, and in talking to so many different founders, and also the founders and businesses I'm working with, is this identity piece. It's such a
Mhm.
huge opportunity in terms of what next culture looks like. It's like what, next culture, next identity. Like, there's this continuous evolution of us as people, as individuals, and also as part of the business, that we're scaling and growing as well. And I just don't think we like you say, we go back to this short term approach to things, and then yet we need to really get the foundations of who are we really? What are we aiming for? What is that North Star that we're always going to continuously come back to ensure that as we evolve, our identity is evolving with less ego and less
Yeah.
societal norms and more from a place from from the inside out, if that makes sense. It's coming from within. Like, everything should start from within, not externally, and not seeking that external validation. Do you agree?
Yeah. And I do, and I do want to share a bit of our data when it comes to this and how we approach that. But actually, I want to throw the question back to you because I'm curious. You said you've met a few people and you've engaged this conversation. So, what are the different types of people or profiles that you've met, and how do they exhibit kind of these either tensions or points of transformation? Like, what have you been seeing?
I've been seeing more and the identity piece keeps coming up for me, like, and I think because I've been through my own evolution from an identity perspective in the last 3.5, 4 years now. Like, that's the formless, the continue, learn, unlearn, relearn. It's my own learning, what's the word? Learning journey, if you like. And I wrote down before the need to subtract as you go. Like, if you continue just to learn, and not eliminate and subtract and surrender and let go, you can get learning overloaded. And so that's a big part of it for me. When I talk about this identity piece, I just don't, what I'm seeing is a real gap in terms of founders and businesses. And you brought up AI, and we're at a real inflection point, and we're at a huge inflection point. And I've been reading some fascinating articles even the last 24 hours just on culture and the impact that machines, AI is having. And so where I'm going with this is that I don't think we've paused enough to actually sit back, reflect, and really go, who am I and what am I? Who is my business? What is my business? As I go through the greatest revolution that we're probably, well, who knows? We're going through a huge revolution as we speak. And it's only when
Yeah.
you ask the question, tell me a little bit about you, or what does your business or brand mean to you? And how is your own identity part of that? I get these blank stares. Do you know what I mean? And so it's been really interesting for me, because then I go, wow, that's a big gap. Like, because from my own background, I'm like, what's happened? Like, we have to be really careful. We could become all quite really beige if we're not careful. And so for me, it's something that's really important as part of, the next gen of culture, the next gen of identity, is how do we remain authentic? How do we get back to ensuring that that is part of the foundation of what we're building or how we're evolving? I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
You,
It's,
you
yeah,
did. But I mean, we've spoken a couple times before just to get to know each other. But like the more you say it, the more I feel really connected to what you
yeah,
said. And framework, the way that we approach people to join our community, I think they ask those questions, which is very disturbing. They're
yeah.
existential in nature to take that step back. I don't want to nerd out a bit, but I do want to share. Um, there are quite a few theories, psychological theories and identity theory that we've worked with. So we do a lot of identity theory as well as learning science like neuroplasticity. So we've got the
Yeah, I
background
love it.
identity part and we have the learning part, which is your journey forward. And I'd say one of the frameworks that we've used, this is a framework, but one of the theories we've used in application was, or is rather, adult development theory, which was
Mm,
developed by American Robert Keegan. And I think the premise is fairly simple. I only took like one course of psychology back when I was in university, but it looks at the way we grow as human beings, not as an accumulation of knowledge over time. So you
mm.
were talking just now about how like, knowledge, knowing, but then stopping, like no one's actually talking about who we are as people.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem with our identity issue. Sorry, keep going.
That is exactly the problem. And your identity is the content in your brain might be growing, but you as a person might not be. And under adult development theory, Keegan basically says that we have different stages of identity based on our relationship with the environment, including other
Mm,
people.
mm.
So there are like 5 or 6 stages or so, 5 stages. In the middle of that, most of us are stuck in, well, we basically move in terms of what society expects of us, the social mind, parents say. And a smaller population of people around the world have exceeded that stage 3, which is the self-authoring mind, which is you've broken free from those expectations. You've created your own identity based on that. And beyond that, even more, which is constantly challenging your own identity, which is the highly transformative stage, that final stage, which he says only 1% of the world has ever achieved. And I think exactly. So when you were talking, this whole, if we understand our identities as a constant interaction of our egos and the
Mm,
environment and other people, asking a question from that perspective has given a lot of constructive pause to the people we've met,
mm.
because it's their emotions when we talk about these things that make them wonder why, that make them realize that there's so much more to explore about yourself. So when we say
100%.
this is not a SWOT analysis, we're not talking about your strengths or weaknesses, and they're like, why not? I would throw the question back and say, how did you feel when I told you it's not a SWOT analysis? And you said, why not? And they said, I felt a bit threatened. And I say,
Yeah.
okay, where did that feeling of threat come from? Am I changing your perceived value in this world? You know, and then they'd think and they'd think, they're like, yeah, I think I was a bit threatened because maybe my entire conversation these past 15 years of being a professional had always been around telling people what my strengths were because that keeps me relevant in the market. Like, so where did you get that from? Like, oh yeah, my mom made me study really hard when I was in school. And we keep on going and going. And there's this history of how your identity developed, even up to the point that talking to me or talking to you can pick out moments of where they're trying to defend or reinforce their current worldviews. But we think that, to your point, if you take a step back and look at your identity, the future possibilities is actually creating new worldviews.
Yeah.
And that whole
And it's
transformation.
endless. And it's endless. And I can, and I think, and I come right back to, I love constructive pause, by the way. I'm going to borrow that. So thank you. I say the power of the pause, presence. I think about, leaders and founders, the need to have that, the people, the presence, the purpose, and the performance, and the constructive pause. Because the minute you say to somebody, you need to sit with yourself and you need to pause, because that's where the downloads come from. I'm a bit of a, well, I'm not, I won't use the word woo. I believe in the universe, and I believe that, when you pause constructively, that's when your identity really shifts. That's when you really start to learn about yourself. Your ego is dismissed. You're not looking outside. You're sitting on the inside, and it gets uncomfortable. And I think that a lot, coming right back to this inflection point around AI, and there's a lot of scarcity, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of, grabs for like holding on for dear life from an external perspective. And we can either choose to, I guess, come to, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job tomorrow and what's going to happen and da, 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 da. Or this is where we have the ability and the chance, if we pause constructively, we can start to really reshape who we are from the inside out. And this is where our identity is able to shift. And I think that we're at a really interesting time in terms of the possibilities are endless. And some people might look at me and think she's just this crazy optimist. I do think, though, that this is a revolution. This is where, like, if we don't evolve, we're going to get stuck. So we either keep looking for the external validation and letting our ego,
Mhm.
run the show, if you like, or we actually go, you know what, I'm actually just going to pause, and I'm actually going to start to sit with this. And so I'm going to start to see where this identity of mine is going, and then what is my next chapter, or what's my next evolution, if that makes sense. And so this is when you kind of come back to industries, etc., and pull, and the word collision. I love that word, because when you think about wellness and you think about hospitality, they're so disparate. And I use that
Right.
as an example that there's so much that could come together there as well. You know what I mean? So Anyway, I get excited about this conversation because I just don't think we're I think there's just a huge opportunity for everyone to really take stock of their identity now, and not just the identity of themselves, but the identity of the business, the identity of what they're building, so that
I think that, yeah. No, I mean, I agree with it. The organizational point, I think, is super important too.
yeah.
Uh, I we we've endeavored in doing this little activity on a monthly basis in our organization where we're actually actively looking at the identity of the company. And so what that does is that it breaks away the assumptions of if you have an organization with a mission, everything will trickle down from the leadership. Like instead of trickle down or forcing yourself upwards as someone who's like a pioneer in an organization, it becomes kind of like a trickle around situation. You have a bunch of people who are taking on their own identity journeys with the understanding that everyone else in the organization is taking on their identity journeys too. And you're coming together to change the identity of the company along with, the leader, so to speak. I mean, we still have a CEO, but we've gotten rid of CXOs for this reason. We're being like similar to being formless, I suppose, right? Because this type of culture, I think, helps our learning journey. So it becomes more of like a trickle around effect, like a truly
Mm,
co-creative effect that I think one time you mentioned to me this whole idea of a company actually growing its identity. It's almost like it's growing consciousness of sorts. Like we treat it almost like a
yeah.
person.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, biology scales, right? As humans, our biology scales. A business is a living, breathing organism. It has cells. Like I've done a whole, not a, well, not a thesis because I didn't have to submit it, but I did write something ages ago. And funnily enough, I pulled it out the other day, and I was looking at that business analogy, and it's absolutely that. And I think this is again coming back to right back to culture, and right back to what does it look like, and how do you solve for a complex system. I mean, the complexity is I've been playing with the idea of it's not just rising complexity, there's just emerging complexity every day. And I feel like each and every day I wake up and I'm like, oh my gosh, here's another form of complexity I didn't even expect. So we've got risk, no, sorry, rising and emerging, rise, emerge. And it's like, what do we do with that in a business environment? How does our identity as a collective, thrive in those sorts of environments? So there's just so much there, James, and I just think this is where I guess the future is playing out, and then how do you play within that, and then yeah. I could go on and on about this because I just love this conversation, and I hopefully the listeners aren't thinking, aren't going, "Gosh, this is so theoretical," because it's absolutely not. For the listeners and everyone listening to our conversation right now, I guess my ask is to start to allow yourself to pause and ask the questions that who are you? Who am I? What is my business? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Am I where I want to be right now? Am I feeling fulfilled? And rather than looking externally for all of that, it's like how do we come back to sit within and sit with the uncomfortability of it all, the uncertainty.
I agree. Absolutely. And it's always dynamic. The journey is dynamic. It's not about establishing the right pillars and seeing it through. It's being able to have the ability to destroy the pillars along the way and
Yeah,
rebuild
yeah,
them as necessary.
absolutely. So, two final questions for you. Can you believe we've already spoken for like 40 minutes? This is what I love about these conversations. We get into a flow state. We've been in a flow state where we're just like,
Yeah.
and then you look up and you're like, oh, we've been talking for 40 minutes now. What is, what is next for Reapra? Like, where are you guys are doing a lot of obviously research practice. You're working with a lot of founders. You're looking at various industries. What's on the cards for you guys for the rest of this year? What does it look like?
So this year, there's a lot of focus on market expansion, quiet entry. So we have, I guess, our version of proof of concept. We have a nice community of founders in Japan and Singapore that are already creating purposeful, profitable companies. based on the way that they've seen their identity and where they want their identity to take them in the future. So actually, on my portfolio, Australia is high up on the list. So I have a nice pipeline of people as well as a tiny community that is slowly growing. Please be when I'm in town. I would love for you to to come to our events or meet at least the
Yeah,
people on my
absolutely.
team.
Yeah, for sure. I said to her, "Would most definitely when you get here and, if I ever get well, if I ever when I get over to next to Singapore, that's exciting." And I love the purposeful and profitable and the fact that you continuously bring this identity piece into it. But last question. What's my last question for you? If there's one thing that a founder would I want to bring this back to culture and identity.
Please.
If there's one thing a founder could do quite immediately when it comes to losing their ego and making a difference in their environment, what would you suggest?
One of the quickest ways to get a reaction and see if it would make certain changes in their cultures to ask them the simple question, when are you stepping down? And they say, I just started the business. And I said, well, exactly. What do you mean, when am I stepping down? I get a lot of, but this is my baby. I'm stepping down when it's necessary. Or I haven't started it yet. Or James, I've built a company that's 40 people strong or whatever it is. I said, you're still not answering my question. When are you stepping down? And you get a glimpse into, and they get a glimpse into how much their identities are of their current identities are melded into the company identities, and
Mm.
they're not thinking about the life of the company, they're thinking about the life of themselves, right? In certain respects. So I'd say the quickest way is to do an identity check and ask them, how do you see yourself vis-a-vis your company? When are you stepping down? Other than that, you're going to go on to
Yeah,
things like,
absolutely.
let's talk about your childhood, stuff that
Yeah,
we
it's
do on a normal
incredible.
basis. Yeah.
I think that's going to be the thumbnail for our conversation. Oh my god, there's so many thumbnails. When are you stepping down? What a great question though. Talk about an ego reality check and an identity check and yeah, a complete, change in environment. Hey, speaking of, you know how you were saying you might get somebody knocking at your door?
But
I've just had House of Irony and now Marley Bob's bucking his head off. James, on that note, thank you so much for your time. How do we find out more about Reapra? How do we find out more about you?
Sure. Please look me up on LinkedIn. I'm also happy to share all forms of communication. I can share with you my other forms of communication. You can find us on Reapra.com. You can find us on our LinkedIn page as well. We're very easy to communicate with. We're having conversations with everyone. So if you want to get to know our program, just hit us up.
Amazing. I love
That's
it.
it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, James. Good. All the best with the move as well. And thank you so much for a really deep conversation. I feel better for it.
Likewise. I love being here. And I hope to see you soon in some of our,
Yeah, me
I don't
too.
know, events.
Definitely. Yeah, I love it. Absolutely. Thank you, James.
All right. Thanks, B.